Okay, so today, guys, we are back with a bit of a different video. I've been wanting to make a video about this particular hand that I played a couple of days ago on stream that some of you may well already have seen. And I was looking for someone to come on a video with me and have a look at the solve for it, break it down, and see what we can take from it. I asked pretty much everyone I could find on Discord, and the only person that responded was Mark Weasel1991, because he's got absolutely no life whatsoever. Mark, thank you so much for coming on.
Anytime, mate. I love getting digged by you straight off the bat. It's great. Yeah,
It's just going to become a thing. If you ever come on a video, just right off the bat. But what we're going to do, guys, is we're going to play this live section of the hand that I do obviously have from my stream. And then after that, you'll obviously have seen the whole hand. And then me and Mark are just going to have a conversation about how we feel this hand should have gone down, any considerations that we have based on whether we should be sticking to theory in this particular spot, and just generally break down each street and have just a discussion about the dangers potentially of always sticking close to theory and how we expect the pool to differentiate its bet sizing to the solver and what we see from the solver. Anything to add, Mark, before we go and take a look at the hand?
No, let's get into it.
All right. So now, guys, I'm going to play the hand, and we'll be back after that. Maybe not. Early's not very happy with me, guys. So we started against the... Oh, Jesus God. We're against the viewer here, guys. We have the overbet on the turn. You can do this with ace king, but we block it. I'm going to call again. Check the river.
Bomb incoming. Oh God.
I don't like blocking. Well, I do like blocking aces and ace king, but I don't like it in the fact that it makes me want to call. I also have Jack's blocker. He shouldn't overbet kings, so like this feels like a somewhat of a call to me, but I'm obviously not thrilled about it.
I like it.
Yeah, loved it.
Oh. So, guys, what you've just seen is a hand between me and a very good player that I play with in my 16L pools, and also a regular viewer, pops in the stream every now and again. And you'll have seen me call a rather large river bet, and that is the hand we're going to talk about today. Now, we do have the sim already done, thankfully, because it's massive. Maybe my inputs are off, or it's a 20 gig sim. So what we're going to do is we're going to look first of all at the ranges, and I'm just going to ask Mark. Obviously, it's nice to know that your inputs are right, because obviously they can affect the results a lot. So, Mark, this is our button opening range. Are you okay with this? This is obviously the villain.
Looks pretty good to me. What ranges have you used, just out of interest?
They're my upswing ranges. I've done a tad of deviation, but not a lot.
Okay, yeah, looks pretty standard.
And then this is my defending range. You could argue for some Jack 10, I think, in there, but I can't run it again, guys. so this is how it is. But you are mainly okay with this. Like, you don't think it's going to be a huge problem based on the inputs of the ranges?
No, not at all. Yeah. It's pretty much bang on.
So, guys, this isn't going to be the most like clean cut thing ever. We're just going to talk about this spot, and we've got a lot of things to say about it. We've already had a little brief discussion, Mark, and we just thought it ended up being very interesting, and we decided to have a talk about it with a view to making a video. So, as you can see, as expected, nothing to say here. We check, which we're doing with everything. And I've given the villain quite a few bet sizes. Now, Mark, you said you'd probably just go with a couple of sizes here. This is probably where the majority of my memory take up has come from. But do you want to talk a little bit about the sizes that our opponent's going to be choosing with this whole range here, with the different parts of this range? Sorry.
If I was to run this, I'd probably just pick two sizes in general, just because, to be fair, my computer's hardware is probably not as good as yours anyway, so I can't really. It takes ages if I was to run, something that's 20 gig. Most of mine, if it's a single raise part, it'll be up to 6 gig.
Yeah.
That's like the highest I'll let mine go, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think either if you're using this and you don't have a really good PC, you can just simplify it to have two sizes, a small bet and a large bet, rather than,
that's fair.
All of this. If you sort of know sizings on boards, like on a king eye board, like King Jack 5, it's generally going to pick. I mean, it's kind of, obviously your 3 sizings at the top. It's mixing between those, but you could just simplify this to have big bets and small bets if you want.
Yeah. And I think generally that's what it's doing. It's got like 22% of the time it wants to go quite big here, 23% of the time, and then the rest of it is choosing small. So we know that our opponent went small, but it is doing a lot of big betting, with a lot of its strong hands like aces, ace king, king jack, king queen, and then mixing in some complete air with its large bets as well.
If we look at the color for each one though, where it's mixing,
yeah,
you know, it'll, if you look at the difference between, you know, obviously it's going to pick the small bet and the large bet sometimes, but you know, the 6.89, the 4.5 and the 3.3 is normally mixing between those 3 anyway.
Yeah.
So because it's mixing with those for each hand, it's not like it's, you know, picking the biggest bet with a certain hand, then a bet smaller with a different hand, and then a slightly smaller bet with a different hand. It's just mixing with those. So for that reason, you can just, especially in this case, you know, just simplify it and just have a big size and a large size. And I'd like to see this run just with, you know, big and small one day as well, you know, potentially after the video or something, and just see what kind of differences we end up with, and you know, what kind of hands we're calling with on the river and stuff.
That makes a lot of sense. So we can see that the opponent's size that he's chosen is a reasonable option, generally speaking, on this board. So with enough said about that, I think, Mark, unless you have anything else to say, we'll move on to my decision.
Facing seems pretty standard.
Facing a small bet. And as we can see, we're raising much more often than we would do against a large size. In fact, if we do choose a large size, let me just see how true that is. Yeah, so if we chose, say for example, we chose the pot size, we're raising 4% of the time versus a pot size, or like a 5% of the time against a large size. But if we were to bet, if our opponent bets small, then we do raise an extra 10% of the time, which is not insignificant, Mark.
No, okay. And it's building the range here around 5s because that's the strongest hand which we want to put money in versus a smaller bet. But then obviously we have to make it up with, you know, bluffs and more marginal hands kind of thing.
We've got the Jack 5 in there, unblocking top pair seems good. And then we're mixing in some ambitious backdoor / overcard, ace deuces, ace threes, things like that, and some 5-4s. So it versus a small bet, we do want to have some raises, mixing in some obviously very strong hands with some very good hands. Obviously, our opponent doesn't always, as we've already seen, have to have, you know, the very best hands when he bets this sizing. So with our particular hand, we have a call, and I think there's nothing much to say about that, Mark, I would say.
No, agreed. Call. Can I just ask you, Nick, what how often are you raising hands like ace 3 suited and ace 2 suited here? Like, yeah,
I mean, it's a good question, and I would say obviously versus a small sizing, I would like to say it's non-zero, but I imagine I would do a lot of calling. I do think it makes a lot of sense to. I mean, I'm not a robot, you know. You're much better versed in this than I am, and a lot of people are. But I think looking at this now versus small sizing, and knowing that I want to have 5s and like Jack 5 and start putting more money in, it makes a lot of sense to have a lot of these other hands that we're looking at here. Whether in practice I would actually have them in there, I'm not sure. But I'd be very conscious if I did want to raise something like pocket 5s and Jack 5. I'd be very conscious about what hands make the most sense, and having an overcard and some backdoor flush draws and the backdoor straight draw makes a lot of sense to me.
Plus blocking some strong hands like ace king and ace jack and aces.
Exactly. And and then it's also mixing in some like 5-3 and 5-4, which I can't say that I would disagree with, based on the fact that we block bottom set and have the backdoor flush draw. And also we can bang off a 5, you know. Exactly. So we do call, which again seems reasonable. We're going to be doing that half the time with our entire range according to theory. Excuse me. Already had that mapped out. So we go for another check, Mark, and nothing to say. And our opponent, interestingly enough, I mean, this is probably a lot of people watching, I would say, will be interested to see this. In fact, I was super interested to see this. And when it bets small on the flop, the solver that is, it just wants to choose between overbet and check. Do you have anything to say on why it might be doing that?
It's basically, I assume, just leveraging our advantage. We obviously have a huge advantage in the way that there's so many hands we have as the aggressor that, you know, the big blind doesn't have. And so when solvers do this and they pick between overbet and check, it's, you know, the overbet's more polar, so it's, you know, a very strong hand or nothing a lot of the time. So a lot of these weaker hands, like, you know, hands like Ace Jack and Jack 10, and I would imagine some of the weaker King X, like King 7, King 9, King 6 suited, they are just checking back. I think in game, in reality, that I think you could, you know, you don't have to just, I wouldn't say you'd have to follow the solver's advice and just go check or, you know, big bets. You could probably still play, you know, kind of GTO and a good theory with mixing in, you know, maybe a half pot bet, especially if you think, you know, villain's quite sticky, but then we're, you know, talking more exploits.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's basically just over betting or checking, which I was very interested in this because if we look at Kings, for example, pocket
exactly.
Kings is just pure over betting. And I would have thought that it would be, if we were betting smaller sizes, that we would be, you know, using a smaller size.
Yeah.
Or I thought that the solver would be checking sometimes with Kings. But
I mean, it might be worth just quickly looking before I do touch on the point you just made with pocket kings. Just looking at, say, if we want to go big and then core and then check, we are now starting to have some bigger sizes, and the majority of the time, as you can see, kings is featuring as that non-overbet size rather than that overbet size. Okay. So that's worth noting, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
And it will become relevant later on, I think, based on my assumptions, and you will have seen already in the hand itself that I suggest that my opponent's not going to have an overbet with a top set on this board, which I think, Mark, you agree with is very fair.
For sure, I don't think anyone does.
Yeah.
Really.
So while the solver, and this is why we're talking about this today, this is why we're having this conversation. While the solver understands that when it bets small on the flop, it wants to overbet with the whole range it wants to bet with on the turn. Our average player, no matter how good he is, and this guy is good, he is very good, he's just not going to be, and even to be honest, he probably doesn't know the difference between, like, who does, like, knowing the difference between betting small here and betting big on the flop, and how much that affects your betting range on the turn, and how much that would influence your sizings. What we can see is that he doesn't really want to overbet the turn at all with kings and when he bets large. So my assumptions about that play and yours as well are probably going to be true the vast majority of the time, because the only way that this is not going to be true is if he's somehow the biggest robot in the world and knows that when he bets small he's only going to overbet everything, and when he bets big he's actually going to do a lot of overbetting but still mixing in some smaller bets with kings, which is the general consensus that we had about this hand. Would you say that's fair?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So I hope that made sense. Mark, did that make sense?
Yeah, no, I think so, yeah.
Cool. So he goes for a large bet, which he's doing with everything when he bets small. And I think this is that part we just spoke about is super relevant to our river decision, which we'll look at obviously just a second. Now, with our hand in particular, obviously versus overbet, you wanted to say some things about what the solver is defending versus this overbet, and what you expect general pools to be defending against this overbet. So I'll let you talk about this now.
I mean, I think the general pool is going to fold most of the range, to be honest. So obviously we're not really raising 2% of the time, but you know, we can just effectively ignore that and just choose not to raise here. I think that's probably an easier strategy.
Yes.
So we're mainly just calling. I think against the majority of the players, they're going to be folding a lot more than they should be effectively. So for example,
In theory,
we're calling, Jack 6 suited, for example, Ace Queen, you know, Ace Jack. Obviously, I would just expect like players to just call all their King X and fold pretty much everything else.
What about their King 4s and 3s and 2s that are continuing here? Do you expect people to generally continue that?
Most players are still continuing those King X because you know, we do have a lot of, you know, natural bluffs in, you know, Queen 10, Ace 10, Ace Queen, stuff like that. Yeah. So, you know, in a way, King 10, in terms of, you know, blockers, is blocking some of the obvious bluffs. So in a way, you know, King 3, King Deuce is in a way a better call. So I'd expect most villains to be continuing with that. But yeah, even the solver there, Jack 4 suited. Yeah, Jack 4 of spades, we are you know, calling 93% of the time,
Hmm.
raising 6% of the time. That,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that just doesn't happen. Like, it just doesn't. Any stakes that I've played, you know, up to 200 NL, I can never imagine seeing, you know, even Jack 4 suited defending the turn, to be honest.
I mean, this is what we're talking about when we say that, you know, the theory can be somewhat dangerous, because it's going to expect, obviously it's playing against the ranges that we've given it here, and its actions are going to be based on the fact that it expects these hands to call, when in reality we don't think they do. Is that fair?
Well, yeah, let's ask you, Nick.
In
Before watching this video, are you calling, even against this opponent who's,
Mate,
you know, relatively aggressive with you, are you calling Jack 7, Jack 6, Jack 4 suited?
I can't say that I would. No. These three here, no. This, no, I don't think so. I mean, what about you? Ace Queen on the turn?
Ace Queen, yes, I think.
Yeah.
Honestly, Jack X, no.
Yeah.
Like Jack 4 suited, probably not. Ace Queen, a reasonable amount, because I expect all my opponents to, you know, double barrel a lot. I mean, the thing is with Ace Queen, at least you've got a 10 that just, you know, you can drill the nuts.
Yeah.
And it's a card that might improve him, and, you know, we might want to bluff on.
Yeah.
Whereas, and you've still got an overcard. Whereas, you know, Jack 4, you could be dead. You know,
exactly.
I mean, at least with Ace Queen, you're always drawing live, even if it has only to 4 outs.
Again,
but
yeah, and again, it's playing against
Ace Queen. I'm probably calling.
It's playing against this, right? So obviously, when we know this, Jack 6 becomes like a lot nicer. But do we expect our opponents to be overbetting with these frequencies? We just don't know, do we? So yeah, we have Ace Jack, and you said that you told some Jack X. Ace Jack, you think has some properties that you like about calling here, I'd imagine.
Yeah, again, we still have, you know, more outs. You know, again, in kind of a way, when we talked about the King 10, you know, King Deuce unblocks bluffs, whereas King 10 blocks some of the bluffs. I guess, you know, Ace Jack in a way does block some bluffs with Ace 10, Ace Queen, but then we also block Ace King and Aces, which, you know, are two of his strongest hands effectively, and blocking pocket Jacks as well, and, you know, King Jack and Jack 8 suited. So I think Ace Jack, because we can't just continue with King X, I think here that we do want to, you know, even before looking at this sim, just, you know, we know that an aggressive opponent's going to be very aggressive on this kind of board because it favors them. So I don't think we can just call with our King X hands. So we have to have some Jack X hands. So I'm calling, you know, Ace Jack here for sure. But as we move down and, you know, Jack 4 suited and stuff, it's just not
understood. So you're happy with our call, and we know what our range looks like moving into the river, and this is obviously where we're probably going to be talking the most about our decision, although we have still spent quite a lot of time on it already. But I think these are all points that we've made that are very, very much worth making as we go into this very interesting river spot where we check and the solver is doing a bunch of jamming. Now, at the time when I was facing my decision, when I had my decision, I was saying things like, right, well, obviously some stuff. It's really nice here to block Ace King, and it's really nice to block pocket Jacks, and it's really nice to block Aces, which I expect to do this. As we can see here, the solver's not a big fan, or when I say not a big fan, it's just never jamming Ace King and Aces. It's just not doing it. Jacks, it is doing it. And it's just popping kings in. Now, I said I don't expect him to overbet the turn with kings. I don't expect him to maybe necessarily jam the river with kings, because he blocks a lot of our calls, right? So I think in theory, while this I imagine will obviously make sense to the computer, do I expect, and Mark, I'll put this to you, do you expect to see overbet jams with kings here? Like my leaning was that it was better to block Ace King and Aces than it was to block kings.
I think that's a fair analysis, to be honest. You know, I don't think most players are jamming kings here. Just as we said on the turn, I don't think enough players are overbetting the turn with such a, you know, with a hand that blocks so much on a, you know, a relatively dry board. If there's a flush draw, or, you know, it's two-tone, there's two flush draws out there, I can see it a lot more often because there's going to be a lot more natural bluffs, so we're going to have to defend wider and such. But, you know, I can't imagine even a lot of the players. Some of the more aggressive ones will, because they'll be having so many bluffs that they will just want to bang in kings.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, this sort of smaller sizing is more, you know, more prevalent in people when they have like such a strong hand, you know, when they block some of the board.
So we are going all in a bunch with our king jack, and obviously all of our 2 pairs want to do a bunch of shoving, apart from some large bets, some very large bets, pot size bets, leaving like 30 behind with king 5 and jack 8, pocket 3s as well that we managed to get there with. The bluffs, Mark, that it wants to use here, we've got some 10 high, some 9 high, some queen 4 and queen deuce, some ace deuce and ace 4. Now this will also obviously become relevant when we look at my decision tree on the river. What do you make about its choices to bluff with here?
Some of it's strange, some of it's, you know, kind of standard. The way I approach bluffs a lot on the river is if we don't, you know, ideally you want to block a lot of the calling range. So maybe, you know, some of the strongest hands we're going to have is maybe, you know, king queen or something like that. So maybe with a queen in our hand. But if I can't really find a good hand I want to jam that blocks the calling range, then I just jam when I'm lower down in my range. So my triple barrel bluff in this spot, the line I would take with this line as a bluff would be 6-7 suited. I would always be probably c-bet and flop.
It's a big fan of that.
Over bet and turn. And then, yeah, just because, you know, I have 7 high, can't really have a worse hand. So I just think, stick it in, pray you fold. So I think that would be my sort of main bluff.
You were surprised to see, obviously, our opponent on this occasion showed up with queen 5, which, by the way, is not featuring on the turn, which, again, may become relevant when we look at my decision. You were talking about, when we just briefly looked over this earlier, that you were interested in the decision's differentiation between queen deuce and queen 5 and queen 4 and queen 5. But queen 5 doesn't want to pop it in even though it blocks a set, but queen 5 and queen deuce do, being at the near the very bottom of the range here. What
do you think makes a better bluff?
Well, this is why we're making this video, right? Because in my head, queen 5, it's not going to win like at showdown, but it also has a property that I like in that it blocks a set and it also blocks king queen. Obviously, unblocking queen 10 could be a problem, but it's going with queen 4 anyway, so that doesn't really make much sense to me. I would have said that queen 5 would have some pretty good properties for me to choose as a bluff, simply because we block one of our opponent's very, very strongest hands that we've said before. Even though the solver is doing a bunch of raising on the flop, we may not be with this hand. Versus the small sizing, of course, we're going to probably do a bunch of raising centered around pocket 5s, as we've seen. So maybe queen 5 therefore becomes less good because we should be doing a bunch of raising. In fact, I'm not even sure we get here with pocket 5s based on the solver's approach to this hand. So
small size on the flop.
Yeah, so it all really comes down to whether we raise that small size on the flop, and that small size on the flop has changed everything about this hand, right? So it doesn't like queen 5 as much as we would think, because we shouldn't have pocket 5s. So having the 5 blocker is just not relevant to it, you know? So that it's checking, but queen 4 and queen deuce being close to the bottom of its range it goes with. Now these ace 4s and ace deuces are also very relevant to what we're about to see. Anything else to note, Mark, before we look at my decision on the river?
Yeah, just so if we hover over aces and ace king, if you look that it's just mixing between those two smaller sizes. Again, you know, for those that want to use GTO Plus or want to use Sims, we can simplify that to just one size, either a third or half pot or whatever.
Yeah.
Because, you know, if you look at the ranges that have these colors in them, it's always mixing between those smaller sizes. So it's not, you know, it's not like there's that much EV difference. There's not going to be that much relevance, because it's not like it's, you know, picking that size with aces and, you know, picking the overbet and mixing between all 4. It's generally picking a larger or smaller size in. So I think, you know, when we run the flop, we can, you know, going back to the flop, we can do the 2 sizes because it's going to be similar in the bigger ones and the smaller ones. And same even when you get to the river, you know, you could run this with just the overbet jam and a small size in and the pot size as well.
Yeah.
And it's not going to skew the results. That it's going to be pretty much the same. It'll just be, instead of having 2 colors for aces and ace king, it's just going to have 1 sort of thing. And same with like 9-10 off, where sometimes we're checking, sometimes we're 9-10 suited and 9-10 off. Sometimes we're betting small as a bluff, because otherwise we just have, otherwise we just have value when we go for the smaller sizing, and that's pretty much what it is a lot of the time.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to note as well, that I don't think enough people will bluff a 1/3 size with, say, 9-10. They're just going to use this overbet size if they're over.
Yeah, exactly. So another pointer towards, we expect our opponent to mostly turn up with overbets when they bet here, right? If they're going to have overbets, then they want to put these things in them. I generally thought at the time, which is why I said it on the stream, like I like blocking ace king, I like blocking aces. And what actually happens in this situation is the reverse. He actually bluffs, or the computer bluffs with a bunch of these ace x, small ace x, and never ever goes large with them, which you might be able to figure out now as we move to my decision. Makes my decision a pretty much pure fold versus this situation. Now, one thing I want to say about this now, having looked at it, the first thing I thought when I looked at this was, I was like, oh, I'm going to be a genius here. I looked at it, I was like, oh, I'm just not at all. And then when you look at it, and the reason why it doesn't want to call with ace jack, obviously, as we've seen, it's because we don't have the properties that I thought I had, when playing in theory. But we also just have a bunch of really strong, better hands to call with that have equally or better or improved qualities over ace jack. Would you say that's fair, Weasel?
Yeah, definitely. So, again, it's all going to depend on how a player actually constructs their range.
Yeah.
We're looking at what he should be doing, and versus if he's never overbet jamming aces and kings, then the ace at least with the jack isn't relevant. Maybe it's bad because if he's jamming some ace x hands, then
exactly,
we block some of his
then
bluffs.
we block those with our particular combo.
Yeah, and the jack's good in that we block king, jack, and jacks, which I assume are just pure jamming.
Yes, they are. Yeah.
Again, yeah, I agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. So effectively, what this comes down to is, Mark, is that we expected pocket kings to do a bunch of small sizing, and pocket aces and ace king to do a bunch of very large sizing. In reality, what's happened here is, and why my hand becomes a very clear fold, even though as you'll have heard, I was sharing my screen with 2 people and they both really liked the call. I was really happy with the call. Mark really liked the call as well before we saw this, and that is because while in theory this is what's happening, I think in practicality we're going to be seeing these show up in the blue colors versus with a general pool, and this show up more often as well because of the 5, right? And this just way less often because we lock the board up, right? So if you, for example, move these over to these colors over to here and these colors over to here, what you'll find is probably much more often ace jack featuring, So whilst this is a pure fold versus what has come out here, a lot of this has just come down to this flop sizing that has just led us to this decision where ace jack is no longer good, even though it's got some fantastic properties like we talked about. If our opponent's not shoving what we block, it becomes pretty bad. And it becomes even worse if it wants to shove things as a bluff, that we then block. So what it wants to do then, therefore, is just call with 2 pairs blocking sets. Like I think you said before, you expect pocket 8s to be a thing that you expect button to show up here a bunch. So having an 8, obviously it loves king 8, jack 8, 8s, and then some king 5s, 2 pairs, king 3, 2 pairs, which makes obviously a boatload of sense blocking those sets. Specifically when we have that top set blocker, and also with some king queen, it wants to do it as well because we've got that top set blocker, which, as we've seen, villain is going, or in theory, is jamming with that top set more often than he's jamming with those other hands that we expect him to jam with. So what we're basically saying is, in theory, my call is looking pretty bad, but I think, Mark, if you want to say some words now about how you feel about it in practicality versus my situation against a player that I think is very good in a general 16 and I'll pull, how do you feel about it then?
I feel okay about the call. Something to say when you said that the general pool, I think it's a mistake saying that because I don't think the
Yeah, yeah.
general pool is taking an overbet on the turn and the river. I know what you mean, you know, your average very aggressive reg in the general pool.
Yeah.
But I think that, you know, most players aren't shoving those
Yeah.
kind of hands.
I think
the
I definitely
people-
misspoke there. What I should clarify is that what I mean is a general aggressive player and someone that's I know to be good that I expect to have a lot of overbets. Let's go with that rather than what I said. You're right.
the general pool, because
Yeah.
the general pool is just not overbetting. But
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
so yeah, it's interesting. It's so strange this hand because if we went back to the flop and just chose a different sizing, it completely skewers the results and what we're calling down with and stuff.
Hmm.
For example, on this river here, neither of us have pocket fives because of what's gone on the flop and the turn. So if you're against a player that might just use one sizing on this flop, like
A
in
larger one.
practice, let's say this guy's a reg
Mhm.
and he's 3 tabling or 4 tabling, you might just see a board and might just slam, you know, 1/3 on it, which I think is fine. You could probably run this sim and bet your entire range for a third on this board because you get to bet pretty wide, you know, for value because you've got advantage. And, you know, using a small sizing, you can get called by worse hands when you bet hands like 10 jack or ace jack, for example. So if we were to choose a different sizing, you know, it's completely different because if we bet, you know, if villain bets pot on the flop, we still have fives because we're not doing as much raising. Probably
Yeah.
still going to raise it sometimes, and this is the thing. So, you know, he could just it doesn't matter if these players aren't using the quote unquote correct sizing on the
Exactly.
flop,
Yeah.
because it completely skews the results. So with this hand with ace jack, I think I like the call.
Should we play the hand
So-
through with a large flop bet?
What
Very
should
quickly?
we?
Yeah. Should we do that now?
Yeah, shoot.
So
Yeah.
large flop bet. We'll go 3/4.
Go pot because I want to see how often
Alright.
it raises fives.
Pot, call, check. Still overbetting a bunch, but not with kings. In fact, it never pots the flop with kings, so maybe we should just go smaller. What do you think?
Well, no. Let's see what pot and
Okay.
let's see what we end up calling
So
on
pot,
the river.
do you want to overbet the turn or bet large?
Yeah, sod it. Why not?
Overbet. We have still an easy call apparently with our ace jack.
Okay.
Check. Jam.
Jam.
Ace jack is calling.
The SPR is smaller here. So.
I'd just like to note, Mark, that I'm pretty sure I had ace of hearts, jack of clubs. So whilst
yeah, but you didn't use the sizings. Don't give me that shit.
yeah, I know, yeah. But what? Yeah, I know. But yeah, I'm just a gentle nudge in that direction. But what we can see is that it likes ace jack a little bit more now, right?
Yeah.
And that's just because of this, because it doesn't have kings as often, and it's jamming these ace king, aces, and ace king that we now do have good blocking properties to, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, we also arrived to the river with an even better hand to call with, pocket fives, which we didn't against the small size. I think that's it, mate.
Yeah, it's
I just want to run it against that smaller size very quickly and see if it makes any difference whatsoever. Still jamming, and ace jack is still calling a decent amount. It's actually look at this now. That ace jack combo, just from that small sizing compared to the pot sizing, is now folding a whole bunch. So
I don't know how useful the different combos are on these kind of boards.
Yeah.
Obviously, some will make a difference based on c-betting. For example, the more likely to c-bet, say, ace queen of hearts, I would imagine, for a bigger size than ace queen of clubs or whatever. But, you know, when you look into individual combos of offsuit hands on on monotone boards, I don't think it's, all as relevant as it should be. It could just be mixing just for the frequencies and just decide, right, we'll call this combo and fold this combo or whatever. It's really hard to interpret those results, correctly.
Exactly. And we can also see that Queen 5 is still not featuring. So, we did talk about the fact that while I'm streaming and it is a viewer, he may want to go after me more often. Therefore, he will have a lot more blast. Therefore, ace jack becomes a lot more attractive in general. And he's also much more likely to value bet those very strong ace king aces hands that we do block that make a lot of sense. And obviously pocket jack still, which makes my call, while in theory we can't really find many decision trees that make it look good in theory, I think I still like it. I think you still like it. And I think obviously when we were on stream, people still thought that it was a pretty fairly winning call. So I thought it would be fair to do this video based on the fact that I made a video saying we should be very, very careful of exploiting too much. I think it's also fair to show the other side where I think folding here, we may well agree that we may have lost value if we had done so. Would you say that's fair?
I'd say, yeah. If anything more so, you don't want to, especially at the lower stakes, just rely too much on theory because not enough players are doing what the solver should do. Therefore, the way we should react against what they're doing is slightly different.
Yeah.
So I think just effectively exploiting in this kind of spot. So I ran some hands myself. I looked in my database to find spots where I'm calling out the big blind and I call a c-bet on the flop and then the villain overbets turn and then I end up showing down. Either they overbet the river or whatever. So many instances, way more often than not. Again, it's not a huge sample. 100k hands, I've only got about 10 hands. But most of the time, they're overbetting the turn as bluffs a lot. And then overbetting the river as bluffs.
Yeah.
So those aggressive players, from what I found, are just over bluffing in these spots. Just with like nonsense hands. There's one where guys 8-5 of hearts, and this is blind on blind, so it's a different dynamic. But it's I think a queen high board, queen 10 something, king on the turn, king on the river. He bets the flop, he overbets the turn, and he just 3x pot jams the river with 8-5. I had queen jack, so I had some really good blocking properties, blocking queens, blocking ace jack, jack 9, and king queen. And this guy was really aggressive, so I'll just call down and just see this just absolute nonsense 8-5 of hearts. There was no heart anywhere on the board, and just absolutely went off on one. So a lot of the hands where I've called in similar spots have just been bluffs rather than value. For example, never once have I seen somebody show down after overbetting the turn on this dry board with a hand like pocket kings.
Exactly.
So, and it's only when we're using the smaller size on the flop, it wants to put more money in on the turn, which makes sense. But intuitively, humans aren't going to do that because, and the hands that I do have, by the way, where they've had value, pretty much every single one. So there's one, I had ace 8, the board comes ace, king, 8, brick, and he had pocket kings, and he overbet the turn, which makes sense because he unblocks top pair. And the other one was pocket 10s on a jack 10 4-4 board, because again, he unblocks top pair.
Okay.
So those kind of boards, overbets from villains. Whereas on a dry board like this, nobody wants to miss out on value with their top set. So they're just going to be betting. Most of the time they're going to be betting, but you'll just see it as sort of 3/4. So I think taking a solver's output and trying to apply it directly into a game where people aren't doing this is going to be burning money. Yes. I've obviously come from the exploitative side of poker before solvers existed, before people were trying to work out the game theory. So I'm very much a fan of trying to, exploit somebody's tendencies. And especially if somebody's in the pool and they might want to bluff you a bit more. I think ace jack for that reason. To be fair, he might end up value jamming more. So ace, king, and aces, he's probably going to jam, right? But then our hand becomes a bit better of a call because we block ace jack, for example. So yeah, I like that we did this video. I like that we talked about this.
Yeah, it's been really interesting. I've really enjoyed it. I mean, definitely. I think to conclude, what we're trying to say is our opponents aren't robots, especially at micro stakes. So while we want to get a general leaning about the kind of thing we want to be doing in this spot, I think that we need to be very careful looking at this and saying, "Oh, ace jack was a fold. What am I doing? I'm a monkey," because it makes so much sense in practice, So
I think what we need to look at from an output of a solver is not exactly what it's doing, and with what hands, but just the try and get an understanding of why it's doing what it's doing. And
exactly.
You can work out that like hands like obviously king 5, king 3 in this example versus this size, obviously a call we have 2 pairs, but just trying to work out why a solver is overbetting and stuff. It's because they have an advantage, or why it's calling with certain hands and stuff like that.
Precisely.
So
you make an excellent
if
point.
they're not, like we've said, if they've not, if they are overbetting ace king or aces on the river, ace jack will become a call in this.
Exactly.
It'd probably be more of a call than like king deuce.
Yeah. So if you were to input these, so like this is what we're talking about in essence. Like this changes everything about what our call should be, and we want to understand why, like you said perfectly, we want to understand why it's doing things. Why is it folding ace jack here? Because he doesn't do this and he's doing this. That's why, that's why it's folding ace jack. If you start putting a bunch of this in, and less of this in, it's then going to call a whole bunch more, right? So, you know, it makes a lot of sense. And this is, we should use solvers, especially at as microstakes players, and even up to Mark's level where there's still a bunch of exploiting to be done. We should use solvers to figure out why it's doing things. And if it's not relevant to our situation, then we need to be very, very careful looking at this and punishing ourselves for making the wrong fold. When in reality, in practice, I think we're doing just fine. Mark, anything else to say before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I enjoyed this little, this little exploration.
Me too.
It was a good video.
Jokes aside, mate, I really, really appreciate you coming on and doing this with me. I don't think it would have been anywhere near as valuable if I'd done it on my own. So I really appreciate you doing it, and I can't wait to make whatever video we're going to make on your channel soon. I think you've got some ideas in mind, so I really hope that we can get something together. If you have enjoyed this, guys, please do consider subscribing and dropping a like on the video. It really does help me out. But for now, that's going to do it. Take care, stay safe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.